The golden cage. The small bird preened a bit upon his perch, running his beak over and over again among his feathers, looking for any little creatures that may have decided to infest themselves there. He found none, as he had cleaned them already, hours before now. This was more out of habit than out of need. There wasn't much that the bird looked forward to, and for some reason, there was comfort in the steady search among his feathers that preening brought to him. He continued thus until the tip of his beak touched upon something that always brought a little pause, a place at the tip of his wing, a marring of the flesh and bone there where some person had clipped them. No feathers grew here, only an angry little knob. With a blink, he pecks it, the pain blinding him, sending him into a rage so that he pecks again, then opens his beak and latching onto the place and biting, swinging his head a bit before releasing his limb, his feathers all ruffled and breathing heavy. His wing throbbed and he looked out the window that his cage sat facing. The tree there was dusty with summer hues, the sun bleaching it, making the leaves seem to reflect a soft silver. He blinks and cocks his head to the side, hearing that sound that always stirred him. The soft songs of other birds out there, beyond the window. He never knew what they sang, he could not decipher their meanings, yet they set his little heart ablaze with a desire, a white-hot thing there within his chest. He draws breath and repeats one of the songs, the notes clear and sweet, yet they didn't mean anything, because they were only copies, they did not come from within. This bird had lived in this cage all his life. The cage was very large, and the bars made of the finest gold. There were several perches and various toys and mirrors along the sides and within it, along with a food and water dish. The bottom was covered in a soft clean layer of pine shavings, which were changed daily by the humans that kept him. The bird had escaped a few times, but could not fly far, and ended up floundering about in the living room until he was exhausted, falling asleep where he lay, his keepers finding him there and tending to him carefully until he was back in health. At times, his wings ached to fly, to lift and to feel the currents of air bombarding his body. Of course, he didn't truly know what this felt like, yet his body and soul ached for it. He could watch others like him outside, sweeping in and out of the trees, soaring high in the air, just faint specks among the clouds. He longed to join them. At times, he'd try to fly inside of his cage, tight circles, but he always ended up slamming against the side, or feeling worse, because it was such a little taste of what flying should be. He grows restless, starting to sway a little back and forth on his perch, his feet moving a little, gripping and releasing the wood as he looked outside, coping the songs that he hears there, beyond the bars of his cage and the transparent glass of the window. This occupies him for a while until he grows thirsty and stops, blinking and spreading his wings. He flutters to the food and water dish hanging along the side of the cage. He dips his beak into the cool water, quenching his thirst and then turning to the seeds kept inside the other bowl, pecking up a couple and then drinking a little more before turning around and fluttering to his favorite perch, the one nearest the window. He cocks his head to the side, listening and watching the other birds outside. He moves slowly back and forth along his perch as he watches, the muscles along his back and through his wings tingling slightly, as if in anticipation. With a blink he stops pacing and lifts his wings, flapping them strongly, his feet tight around the perch, enjoying the feel of his muscles working. He stops happily and lifts a wing, running his beak among the feathers, preening happily there on his perch beside the window, the methodical cleaning calming him somewhat. The few times that he had escaped had been easy, really. There was no door on this cage, but there was such a high drop, the bird knew from experience just how painful of a drop it could be. The first time he had done it, he had tried to fly out and had gotten a little ways before the fact of his clipped wings came into play, causing him to veer and he had panicked, spiraling and smashing into the floor by the window. It was almost a year before he had tried again. This time, he hadn't even flown, more fluttered to the floor. He had walked around a while then. It had been nice, to be able to walk along the beige carpet. The material had felt good against his feet. It was when he had tried to fly, this was when the bad came. He had gotten up and toward that window, his heart soaring as he thought of finally joining those others outside, beyond the glass, only to be jolted to a stop as he slammed against the window pane. The impact tossed his small body onto the sill where he had lain stunned for a time, blinking slowly and listening to those birds outside. After a while, he had roused and stood, shaking himself off and walking to the window, still not really understanding why he wasn't outside. He reaches it and examines it closely, trying to bite it, and when his beak just clicked and slid, he brought his small, but still useful, talons against it. These worked a little better, marring the surface a bit, but not much else. This frustrated the bird and he pecked at the glass, over and over, his small bill doing next to nothing against the thick glass of the window. He spent hours by that window, scratching and pecking at it. At times, he'd attempt to fly at it, only to once again be slammed to the sill, or worse, the ground. Finally, he had been unable to do more, falling asleep on the floor in front of the window, his cage swinging softly in the air above him, awaiting his return. His keepers had found him and tended those self-inflicted wounds, wondering among themselves why he would injure himself so, when there had been an open door on the other side of the room. The bird, of course, had had no idea that there was an open door on the other side of the room. He had only ever seen the window there, tempting him day after day with the sight of his feathered kind. Now, he didn't look at the open door to his gilded cage anymore. He kept away from that side of the cage, shying away without thought, but out of instinct, his past hurts planting a fear deep inside of his heart, overriding even his wanting to be free. The steady preening of the small bird is halted once again as his beak nudges the tender and raw spot on the tip of his wing, letting out a sharp squawk as he again latches onto it, tearing the flesh there and bringing up blood. The squawk brings one of his keepers, a worried tone in her voice as she attempts to calm him, thinking that they'll have to take him to the vet again, maybe do as the vet had suggested and seek a pet therapist, even if this did seem like the silliest thing she'd ever heard of. The poor bird was worrying his wing tips and refused to let them heal. The bird blinks in the woman's gentle grasp, calming somewhat and closing his eyes, sleep claiming him as he heard the sound of birds singing beyond the glass. By A.L. Hadden.